Welcome to Chess with Link, folks. We're going to be talking interference today. Interference is one of those chess tactics that can be kind of difficult to find on the chessboard because it relies on spotting not just how your opponent is defending their pieces, but also how we could either move one of our pieces into a spot to interrupt that defense without losing our piece, or sacrificing a piece so that our opponent blocks their own line of defense. It also tends to get a little bit mixed up with attraction and deflection when you're trying to study interference. So don't worry if this takes a little while to sink into your brain. We're going to go through 4 puzzles together today, and then I'll leave you with a 5th puzzle. All of these come from Lichess and demonstrate something slightly different about how interference works. Let's begin with this one. We're going to begin thinking about how our opponent's pieces are defending each other. So we can note that the queen is protecting the rook at a1 and the bishop at d3. We can't capture either of those right now. We also have a knight guarding the queen. Not that we usually worry too much about the pieces guarding the queen unless we're hoping to capture the queen with our own queen. And notice also this bishop over here at g5. Which isn't guarding anything yet, but certainly looks like it could get tangled up in the fight if we allow it to move. So what could we do here to kind of pick apart this web of protection and make sure that we capture, I'm going to call it 6 points of material without losing anything? Do you see it yet? Notice that if we put our queen over here to c3, capturing the knight, that delivers a check on the king. And our opponent will have to either move the king or block using one of 3 pieces. They could block with the queen, but that's a terrible idea because that'll just allow us to slide back over here to a1 and get possibly even a skewer over to that other rook. Ooh, that would be a problem. So they're probably not going to block with the queen. They could also block with that bishop we mentioned or the f3 knight. And do you see the continuation that would come after that? Because that's one of the keys to thinking about interference. Going 2, even 3 steps into the future and imagining how we're going to not just capture a piece, not just capture a square, but then capitalize on that capture. Let's try queen captures c3. With the king in check, that bishop zips on down to block us, trying even to kick our queen. But notice that the opponent's queen is now no longer defending the d3 bishop. So we can step over and capture it for free, as well as getting a continued diagonal attack over there towards the king. This is one of the great things about interference, is it can allow you to simplify the board if you are careful, or if you're willing to trade. Let's take a look at another puzzle here. This one is going to require us to think just a little bit differently. We notice that our opponent's rooks are guarding each other. It's always great for us when we have our rooks linked, and frustrating when our opponent has their rooks linked. Other lines of protection involved here include the bishop protecting the f8 rook, and the queen guarding the d3 knight, which is something we're going to have to keep an eye on, especially because if we move our own queen, that could lead to a rather uncomfortable check. Of course, if we pulled that f5 queen off of her square, we could capture the knight with our king. I like the idea of getting kings to be more active. And now that I think about kings being more active, I notice that I do have something of a battery here, where my queen would guard my rook if I captured the pawn on g7. Now, capturing that pawn on g7 is not a massive advantage at first glance. It's not like capturing 2 minor pieces in the previous puzzle. But what else is the queen doing? Well, she is threatening that rook at a8. And if something was standing in the way, we could probably go up and take that rook. Are you starting to see it? Let's move our rook from g3 to g7. Now that forces our opponent to move their king up to e8, breaking the link between those two rooks. From there, we are now free to capture our opponent's rook up there at a8, and it's even a checkmate. If we think about the web of connections between our opponent's pieces, and if we take the time to look for that web of connection, we can really simplify the board, and sometimes even force our opponent's king to betray his own pieces and put himself in a dangerous place. Speaking of simplification, let's look at a much more simple board. Here we only have a queen and a pawn against 2 rooks. Oh my goodness, this is potentially a really dangerous board. So what could we do here? How could we make sure that our opponent's linked rooks don't lead to, say, capturing our pawn and forcing our king into a corner, and then we get a ladder mate used against us? What would you do? And remember, giving up is not an answer. We're not going to just surrender this game, especially because if we think about the importance of the f7 rook to guarding the f4 pawn, that might lead us to find a potential line of attack. Have you found it yet? Let's use our queen. It may be tempting to immediately check the king, or try and check the king getting a fork between the king and the pawn. But remember, the rook is guarding, and we really don't want to sacrifice our queen at this point in the game. But if we think about interfering with lines of protection, while also keeping in mind that interference tends to be similar to attraction or deflection, what could we do here? I'm going to take my queen and bring her down to e8. That not only puts the king in check, but forces him to move up to b7, blocking that line of protection between his own rooks and allowing us to gain tempo by capturing with check and a threat on the f4 pawn. And so while this is still going to be an intricate, cautious checkmate, it has become ever so much easier. Let's take a look at a situation where pawns remain important. There's a lot of pawns on the board. And both of us still have 2 rooks, and both of us has queens. Oh my goodness, is there a lot of damage possible on this board if we're not careful? So how could we try to survive this? How could we take advantage of the overloaded queen, that queen that is both guarding the f1 rook and guarding the d6 rook? It might seem a little too simple at first glance. But remember that sometimes in chess, it's not the flashy move, but the silent move, or the waiting move, that breaks your opponent's defenses. And if we could force that queen off of f4, that would break the defenses on the rooks, and potentially even let us attack the queen eventually. So how could we force that queen off of f4? Take a look at this option. Without even risking our queen on the double attack, we could also take a look at this g6 pawn. This might feel a little bit nervous-making at first because, after all, if we lose that g6 pawn, our opponent could check us and gain tempo and potentially even win given the position of the rooks. But keep an eye on what our queen can do. If we nudge our g6 pawn forward to g5, that pressures the queen. She's not going to take back, she's not going to take the pawn, because then we would take her. And now, well, now we are free to continue our attack. We still have to be cautious about the queen's defense of d6. But if we could interfere with that as well, especially in a way that pulled our opponent's f1 rook out of position, that has a lot of potential. Let's keep thinking about pawns. If we push our f5 pawn forward to f4, our opponent has to take it, or move their queen to a really uncomfortable spot. And once that queen's line of protection over to the d6 rook has been broken, we can capture, skewering through the newly moved rook, so our opponent is very unlikely to move it, and threatening to bring our queen up to d1 and deliver a back rank attack. It's not going to be a checkmate immediately, but it's a powerful threat that's going to throw many opponents off balance. Now, folks, I'm going to leave you with one last puzzle. And the clue I'm going to give you is that this puzzle reminds me of the legends of King Arthur. What do I mean by that? Well, King Arthur and his knights, and Queen Guinevere, and some of King Arthur's knights have many stories about how their interactions led to the rise and fall of a fictional empire. So think about knights and kings and queens as you study this puzzle. And if you have an answer to this puzzle that you think is elegant and involves interference, or if you have any other ideas about interference or chess in general, feel free to comment down below over on YouTube, send me a message on OutSchool if you happen to be one of my students, or, of course, check out my website at andrewlink.com, where you'll find more chess guides, as well as a variety of analysis content related to fiction and video games. Have a wonderful week, folks, and I look forward to finding our way to victory on the chessboard together next time.